sometimes doing things wrong is the greatest way to learn what is right occasionally. So sometimes you can learn something that's amazing right off the bat. It seems like there's a lot of individuals in today's world that are very lost. I know I used to be, and we don't know what to do with ourselves, so we kind of get sucked into the norm of society, which might be just, partying or drinking or distracting yourself from your life, and not objectively saying those things are bad, but too much of it is bad, in my opinion, and too many people are doing it too much.
Mighty Brad.
Mindset coach, YouTuber, podcaster, and drummer.
Ask yourself, why? Okay, and on the big side, why am I going towards this life path? Why am I trying to become a doctor? Why am I trying to do this? Why do I want to start a business? Why do I want to do this? And when you ask yourself that question, you, after some thinking, some journaling, and some creative expression and diving into yourself, you usually find the answer. And these answers can be...
Has that reduced your depression and anxiety by giving you a distraction of some sort? Or?
Are there a lot of moments when you're depressed where you'll feel sad and you'll cry? Absolutely. But I think it goes a lot more deeper than that, in the sense of there's a lot more anger than people might think. There's a lot more frustration. There's a lot more feeling of stuckness. There's a lot more of a feeling of...
To be honest, you've been really truthful and you've shared that experience with me. So I think it's best if I inform the audience about experience which I had. I think December, as soon as you accepted the invitation, I was like, I really want to ask this question. I seen that photo of you and Chris Williamson.
I went up to Chris and we introduced ourselves. I'm like, Brad, nice to meet you. And I told him that he looked at me and he had the biggest, and he was like, fucking congrats, man. And in that moment, it was so great because...
Thank you. I wanted to appreciate your constant support. I've done a few podcasts now, episodes, and I've had a diverse number of guests on, and I can see the support has been incredible. I really thank you for your constant support. Be sure to subscribe and follow, as that will help the channel so much in regards to reaching even more people, and it will allow me to get on even bigger guests. Let's get into this episode.
So Brad, if someone's just clicked on this podcast and they are wondering why they should listen to it, what are they going to get from today from yourself?
Well, I specialize in self-development. I'm a coach, I'm a podcaster, and, I really center my life around creative outlets and creativity of the mind and expressing yourself. So I suppose what you can expect from this is some new tactics to apply to your life. Maybe you get some tips on building your confidence, being more authentic, expressing yourself, finding some new creative outlets for yourself, all those different types of good stuff.
What is the journey you have planned?
Well, for myself, I started coaching a few months ago by now. I've been in the self-development space online for around a year and a half, been in developing myself personally for the past 5 to 6 years. And it's been a very long journey, very insightful, many mistakes, many things I've learned from, messing up and doing things wrong. Sometimes doing things wrong is the greatest way to learn what is right occasionally. So sometimes you can learn something that's amazing right off the bat. But, what I have planned is really just keep pushing online, keep growing the following and inspiring more people to follow a life that they really desire for themselves. Because, in my personal experience and in the online space, it seems like there's a lot of individuals in today's world that are very lost. I know I used to be. And we don't know what to do with ourselves, so we kind of get sucked into the norm of society, which might be just, partying or drinking or distracting yourself from your life, and not objectively saying those things are bad, but too much of it is bad, in my opinion, and too many people are doing it too much.
I noticed only 5% of you who are subscribed watch my videos. So if you are here, subscribe. as it will allow me to reach even more people, and it will allow me to motivate you even more. I would really appreciate it, and let's get back into the video.
That's really fascinating, and I think it kind of links in with this show's one of the shows and the podcast through tradition of Desire to Inspire is to ask the guests about their burning desire. I asked the first guest, which I got on, Jordan Hogg. I asked what his burning desire was. So I wanted to ask you, because you touched on it just a bit in the journey part. What is your burning desire? Does it come from your journey? And where do you expect it to take you in the future as well?
Yeah, so I'd say for myself, the burning desire came at a point right after I got released from the depressive state, you could say, right towards the end when I first started to find out what self-development was, or incorporating different habits to make your life and mental health a better place. Once I first discovered them, something sparked within me to then just keep going and keep getting better, because I never had anything like that before that was, pushing me, or any concepts that I thought that I could incorporate into my life that would make it better. So it was all so new to me, and it was revolutionary. It was like a different reality. I lived my entire life just, I was in my teenage years, so I wasn't, old or anything, but I lived my entire life so far just going to school, not even liking going to school, going home, playing video games, doing my homework, maybe hanging out with some friends, going to bed, and doing the cycle over and over again. And once I got into my teenage years, I started to feel pretty lost. I started to ask myself, what am I doing with myself? I don't enjoy school, but I'm forced to go here every day. And so I started to, for the first time, question my reality. And I think this is a really important practice for anybody to do. In the small and the big areas of your life. It can be as big as the life path that you're going down, or as small as the decision you have to make by tomorrow, or this thing you have to finish. Ask yourself, why? Okay, and on the big side, why am I going towards this life path? Why am I trying to become a doctor? Why am I trying to do this? Why do I want to start a business? Why do I want to do this? And when you ask yourself that question, after some thinking, some journaling, and some creative expression and diving into yourself, you usually find the answer. And these answers can be positive, negative, or a mix of both. It could be, well, I don't even want to actually become a doctor. I just think I have to because my parents told me I have to. Or, oh yeah, that's why I really want to become a doctor, because I've always had a burning passion for this. And so you get to find the answer to your question. And it's really important, because so many of us, and I didn't for the longest time, so many of us don't ask ourselves why we're doing the things that we're doing. And then on the smaller scale, why do I wake up at 11 a.m.? Why do I do this at 4 p.m.? Why do I not go to the gym? Why do I go to the gym? Why do I do this? And these might sound like, oh, Brad, you're just saying basic stuff. It's not basic to a lot of us, right? And so I think that's the biggest thing, is to just ask yourself why. And you find these really powerful answers that show you that you're either going in the right direction or the wrong direction. And the right and wrong direction is subjective to your personal experience. I could say to you, I think this is the right path for you. Doesn't mean it's the right path for you. You know yourself so much better than I know you. And all of us know ourselves better than other people know us. And so much of the time, we value other people's opinion about us over our opinion of ourselves. And so we allow ourselves to be dragged by desires of others and things that we think we should do, but it's not actually going to fulfill us. And the list goes on. But to get back to your question, for me, that burning desire really got into place once I started making my life better, because I never knew what even a decent life could feel like. I was depressed all the time. I didn't want to wake up in the morning. I didn't want to go and do anything I had to do throughout every single one of my days. And so actually having things that I can wake up and be excited to do was revolutionary for me. It was a new reality. It was something I've never experienced before. And then, a few years down the line, ending up starting the podcast and starting coaching in recent times and sharing these messages with other people, it's been a very amazing journey so far. Obviously, on the internet, you'll get tons of hate for whatever you decide to do, but there's also tons of positivity that is granted towards you from people. And the best feeling in the world is when somebody watches your video and they say, "Man, I really needed this today," because I know in a place in my life, I try to make content that is genuinely going to help people, and it's going to make that little shift in their mind that'll click like, oh yeah, I should probably do that, or wow, I never thought about it that before. Because I think about it in the sense of the way that I express myself on camera, at least to the best of my ability. If I was in my position 6 years ago when I was depressed, that information would have helped me out. So that burning desire is within me because it's something I never experienced before, and this is just shifted my life into such a more positive space. And of course, I still have bad days. I still get sad. I still get angry sometimes. None of us are ever going to be completely void of, you could say, negative emotions, but they're not even really just negative. We call them negative, but they're just emotions, right? We like to label everything. Everything just is, and if you want to put it in a more spiritual sense. But I think another practice that we can really go about is not judging, whether this is judging other people, but even more importantly, judging ourselves. So much of the time we judge ourselves in the sense of, well, you're not doing this, or you're doing too much of this, or you have to change this, or you're not good enough, or list goes on. If we can start to look at ourselves from a more objective and third person point of view of, okay, going back to asking the question, why do I think this way about myself? Oh, it's because when I was in 7th grade, my parents always told me I wasn't good enough because I didn't do good in school. Whatever the case is. And then you start to dissect these things and you realize that's not even your own belief. Like when you think you're not good enough, it didn't come from you. It came from someone else. But you decided, usually unconsciously, to accept it as your reality. So now it's what you think you believe about yourself. But the beautiful thing about this is that we can change. We can change our mindset. We can change our viewpoint. I mean, you think about, I'm not a part of a specific religion, but you think about any sort of spiritual concepts or philosophies, or someone getting indoctrinated into a certain religion, or being baptized, or whatever the case is. Like for some of these people, this is a revolutionary experience, right? It's like, I'm finally connecting with God. I'm finally connecting with this practice. I'm finally learning this. And I think the biggest disservice we do to ourselves is close our mind to new ideas. We get stuck, and this is so easy to do. We get so stuck in our day-to-day lives. I have to go to work at this time. I have to go to school. I have to get this done. And yes, in order you're going to work to get a paycheck, or you're doing it for this reason, and you're going to school to get this degree. Obviously, you have to get it done. But there needs to be points throughout your day where you are mindful and you understand that this moment that you have now is the only thing that will ever exist. If we can't appreciate this moment now, what makes us think that we're going to appreciate the moment in 5 years once we get that degree? It's going to be the same thing. Alex Hormozy says, you've already achieved goals that you thought would make you happy. We're on an endless hamster wheel of chasing the next thing. And in many ways, this is good. It's good to reach for new goals. It's good to reach for new achievements and gain new, a better financial status or better relationships. It's good to strive for all of this stuff. But if we can't take a step back and look at our life now and say, oh, wow, even though like this part of life isn't that great, I do have this part of my life put together. And these people really care about me. And I'm working towards something I actually care about. And being appreciative of the things that you have now, because if you can't appreciate them now, even though you gain that desire and that goal that you've always wanted to, you're going to get to it. It's going to feel good. It's going to feel great. And then maybe a few days or a few weeks later, and you're like, all right, well, what's next? We're always human beings trying to solve problems. We always think about what's next. And so we gotta bring ourselves back to this moment and appreciate all of this.
Well, I think that's a more valuable answer compared to Jordan. There's like so much things to take out from there. I think one part which I really want to speak about is depression. It's a big problem nowadays, and I read some statistics which I want to share to you and the viewers, which are from the Office of National Statistics, and they said younger people are more likely to have some deep form of anxiety. where in 2021, those aged 16 to 29 were 28% most likely to have some form of anxiety. And in 2022 to 2023, 37.1% of women and 29.9% of men reported high levels of anxiety with a spike in the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's some really crazy stats and figures. And you mentioned earlier that you label yourself as a mindset coach. So, so have you went through depression and anxiety, and how would you define them? Are they the same? Are they similar? How would you define it?
Yeah. So I want to touch on that first point you said before about those statistics. Whenever I see statistics like that, I think to myself, this is like you said yourself. These are the people that are reporting it. These are the people that might be diagnosed. But there's so many more people who aren't reporting that they're dealing with these things, that are dealing with them, right? And so, that number 29, 39% is already pretty high, but it's in reality, it's even higher than that. Like, there's no way for us to be able to, organizations to track everything. And there's this concept in positive psychology, which is a branch of psychology that really focuses more on, finding fulfillment in your life and the greatest things that humans can achieve and stuff like that, rather than focusing on mental illness. And they say that the number one downfall that we give ourselves and that has the worst effect on our health is having poor relationships or not enough good ones. And so that just goes to show that a part of the reason as to why we may be anxious or depressed can be because we feel like nobody understands us. We have no social connection. But anyway, to get back to your question pertaining to me, I was diagnosed with depression. I think I was 13 or something like that. Now, before I kind of explain how I kind of define them in my mind, everybody has a different perspective on this. Some people think that when you're diagnosed with something, you have it for the rest of your life. In terms of anxiety and depression, I haven't done too much research on, bipolar and schizophrenia and all that stuff, so I can't comment on that. But in terms of depression and anxiety, I am a firm believer that you can overcome it completely, or at least 99%, right? And almost cure yourself of it. I believe, from my point of view, from my personal experience, it's gone. It's not here anymore. I mean, are there days where I, feel sad and times that I feel anxious from doing a task? Absolutely. But that's a human emotion, right? In terms of how I define them, I think depression and anxiety are a lot of the times interlinked in the sense of, when you're depressed, you're usually anxious to get up in the morning. And when you're anxious, you might get depressed about something. Not always, but I think a lot of the times they can be interlinked with each other. But I know from my experience, some people have the idea that depression is just being sad all the time and crying and just being super sad and moody all the time. Are there a lot of moments when you're depressed where you'll feel sad and you'll cry? Absolutely. But I think it goes a lot more deeper than that, in the sense of there's a lot more anger than people might think. There's a lot more frustration. There's a lot more feeling of stuckness. There's a lot more of a feeling of, not being comfortable in your own body as a whole, feeling like your consciousness needs to escape. You need to escape from this reality. And that's why obviously some people take their own lives. And it's a hollowness. It's a hollow feeling for life. You feel like there's this giant gaping hole in you and there's nothing you can do to fix it. And so for me, I wouldn't let anybody help me. My parents took me to therapists. My parents tried to talk to me. I wouldn't open up about it. I wouldn't tell them what I was experiencing. I'd walk into the therapy's office. I would get super angry at them and they'd ask me questions and I just wouldn't answer. I'd look down at the ground. I was a very, very angry, anxious, and frustrated kid. And like, I was 13. So, no 13-year-old should be experiencing this type of stuff, right? Nobody in the world should be experiencing this. But especially when you're, 13, you're supposed to be still enjoying your childhood and this and that. But I, you know, now I say fortunately, but in that time it was unfortunate that I had to go through that. But fortunate nowadays because it's brought me to have many realizations about life, and everything that I'm doing on my path now, I wouldn't be doing if I didn't experience that. So nowadays I'm very grateful for it. But anyway, I think people sometimes, mistake the depression aspect as just being sad all the time. And it goes so much deeper than that. And some people think, I had an experience where a friend of mine looked at another friend who, someone else that I knew was, going through mental health issues. He was depressed. And this guy, his family had a lot of money. And so my other friend would say to me, he'd say, I mean, he's got everything in the world. He can buy anything he wants. He's got this and that. His family's rich and he's rich. How can he be depressed? And I thought to myself, it has nothing to do with that. You can have everything in this external world, but there's nothing in this external world that can fill the gaping hole within you. You have to do it yourself. And there's, by all means, things in this external world that can help with that and grant you certain realizations and give you certain material things that may very well be able to help you. But until you deal with the internal, it'll always continue to affect your external, and the external a lot of the time won't be able to affect the internal in a positive light. And, it's very interesting nowadays because I want to say, over the past, let's say 10 years, maybe less, obviously the rates of depression, anxiety are going up and up. And I think, there's so many reasons for this, like you said, the pandemic, people being isolated more, comparison on social media, all these different avenues, and people being addicted to their phones so we don't meet people anymore. There's so many different reasons. And there's also this very interesting, I'm not sure if you've seen it, this very interesting culture online of romanticizing mental illness, which I'm finding is very interesting because we have these communities that are coming together and talking about how the world sucks and how, we're depressed and how my life sucks and this and that. And so, you could say the slight positive of this is that people are coming together and they're talking about this stuff. But I think the problem is that all these people that are coming together that are dealing with these things are not coming together to build a community and try to help each other. They're just coming together to share each other's sorrows. And a lot of the times happens is, I'll say from my personal experience, at least, sometimes you drag people into that, right? Some people who are depressed, and, it's usually not a conscious experience of you like, yeah, I just really want to make this person's day and this person's life worse. No, but there's a part of you that wants to, like, misery loves company. We know this saying, right? A lot of people who are, are depressed or anxious or just dealing with negative emotions want to share that with people. Like you see, like if you've ever experienced a scenario in public where, you just see somebody screaming or somebody really angry. People like to label them as Karens nowadays, right? But anybody who's just, really angry about something that you would view as like something really small. It's like and then this person's yelling at someone else and they're trying to get that person to experience the negative emotion that they're experiencing. So anyway, back to the conversation of these communities, it's kind of getting together and not helping each other, which I think is a problem because it's kind of like you're infecting people. It's like, you're dealing you're dealing with this, mental issue. Here, come here, we'll help you out. But really their help is just shared misery and just, I feel like I imagine this in my mind of just, they're becoming just a morphed ball of darkness and of sadness and stuff like that. And this is in me no way, shape, or form saying that their viewpoints and their expressions are not credible. They absolutely are, and they absolutely are valid for feeling and expressing those feelings and experiences that they're having. But I think there needs to be, if we're going to in any way, shape, or form make this mental illness crisis go down a little bit, we need to, instead of creating communities where we just share misery, we have to create communities where we bring each other up and try and help one another.
There was one point you mentioned about the traumatic experience when you was 13, and you said that you resisted a lot of external pressure. So I just wanted to ask, did the realization come from you to resolve this like problem, or did somebody else say something, or was you exposed to something else which made you fight against it rather than letting it just come into you and just that?
Right. I would say for myself, since it was very difficult to open up to people and to gain a new perspective, for me, it took that external, and so this is a way that an external can very help the internal, or at least potentially guide a spark within you, or grant that within you. The the way I like to describe it, there's a YouTuber, his name is Elijah Long, and he still makes videos. And I discovered him when I was, 13, 14, or whatever the case was, however old I was when I started to realize that I was lost, but I wasn't as depressed as I was anymore. So I think it was closer to when I was around 16 years old. And for some reason, his YouTube video got recommended in, my feed. All I did was watch video game content because that's all I did with my life. But for some reason, his video got mentioned to me. I don't remember exactly what video it was, but, he's a big proponent of, self-development and, talking about relationships and masculinity and all this stuff. So when that video popped in my feed and I watched it, it sparked something within me. It changed a little bit of my brain chemistry. It changed my outlook. It gave me something new because, when I went to school, nobody talked about masculinity. Nobody talked about self-development. Nobody talked about improving relationships. Yeah, you had your health class, but I didn't learn anything in my health class. But anyway, the point is, discover that video. And I thought to myself, wow, my life sucks. Maybe I should, try and get in the gym or start going on walks or meditate or try and look at life in this manner. And I suppose the reason as to why that worked and therapy didn't for me was because it was a very low pressure situation. When you're in therapy, you're, at least in my case, I was, forced to sit in front of this guy or this girl that didn't know. And in my mind, I assumed that they didn't give a shit about me. So I was like, why am I going to open up to this person? But seeing someone on a YouTube screen and, being in your room or wherever I was, being by yourself, it's a lot more low pressure environment where you can listen to the person talk and hear what they have to say. And that was the gateway for me. That was the gateway to honing in on a new perspective and changing the way I viewed the world. And it didn't happen overnight, but the spark of like, oh, maybe I should look into this more kind of got me going on the journey. And then once you embark on, making your life a better place, it kind of just stacks from there. Once you make this area of your life better, then you're like, oh, well, I want to make this better and this and this and this. And it's a very positive snowball effect. At least it was for me. So yeah, I would say that was really a great spark that lit within me in that moment.
To be honest, you've been really truthful and you've shared that experience with me. So I think it's best if I inform the like audience about experience which I had. I think December 2020, I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do, my purpose or where I wanted to go. And I was really sad. And then I went into a bit of depression as well, because I looked at the people around me and I thought they got it figured out. And I'm the only one who didn't have it figured out. And what I did, I think it lasted for a week. I was just listening to like sad music and stuff, because when you're in that kind of place, you don't want to be exposed to people trying to support you or listen to you. And I, I don't think it was showing much. I think I tried to keep it a secret as much as I could, but it lasted for a few weeks. I took a break of socials, and it was a similar situation to yourself, because I was looking at motivational like I was just scrolling through my feed and I seen motivational videos. And when I looked at speakers like Cristiano Ronaldo and Jay Shetty, Tony Robbins, I just thought maybe this is my calling, like a motivational speaker with a Sir. And the Sir makes it so much more challenging and worth it and so much cooler as well. And and my headspace just wasn't there. But once I sat down and I just written what I wanted to do, that is what came to me. But I stayed in that state for a couple of times. But it was a similar situation to you. I was going on YouTube and I saw some videos and I was like, maybe this is what I want to do in the future. Maybe that truly is. And yeah, I think it's a really similar situation. And what is that guy's name, which you just mentioned on YouTube?
Elijah Long.
Elijah Long. What does he specialize in?
Yeah, so he talks a lot about self-development, masculinity. He calls it thumos, just bringing the energy to life and fulfillment, purpose, improving relationships, all that good type of stuff.
Depression is a big concern, so always make sure to check in with those who are close to you. Continuing on.
One thing I noticed looking through your social media pages is that you are a drummer. I think it's in a band called The Servers, who perform like originals and cover music. And I wanted to ask, has being a part of the band, The Servers, like, has that reduced your depression and anxiety by giving you a distraction of some sort, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, so like I said before, or in terms of the band, I didn't say anything about it. I think we started around maybe 9 or 10 months ago, and I was in a band before that for the past maybe 2 years. And by the point I joined the band, depression was gone. But I think for anybody who's dealing with something like depression or anxiety or not, something like any sort of creative outlet or playing an instrument, especially, for example, is a great way to express yourself without feeling judged. At least it is for me. So even though I'm not depressed anymore, and so it doesn't relieve the depression, it does bring me to a different reality. And what I mean by that is, if you were to ever come to one of my shows and watch the band perform, and you looked at the facial expressions that I make when I'm on stage, you might laugh or you might giggle to yourself internally, because when I'm up there, I let go of everything, and there's not as authentic as I do my best to be in conversation and talking to people. There is a level of comfortability when I'm up there, and sometimes I get anxious before I start performing and stuff, but when I'm in the moment, when I'm in the flow state, when the band is in accordance with each other and we're just jamming, we're having a great time, we're expressing ourselves, everything that I've ever thought about or any societal norm, or you can or can't do this in public, it goes out the window without me even thinking about it. And the facial expressions I make and the movements with my body, they're just pure creative, conscious expression of myself. And there's not that many times in my life where I get to do that. Obviously, when I'm on camera and doing podcasts or making YouTube videos, I do my best to talk about all the knowledge that I have and bring myself there and not put on a mask and not be someone I'm not. But that is a level of it that I never even have to think about it. It's just out there, done. And it's such a beautiful process, especially for me, because people sometimes, when I talk to people are like, oh, is it like a good anger, like a good outlet for when you're angry and stuff like that? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. But also, it's the flow state, for example. A lot of people talk about that in terms of creative outlets, especially with an instrument. If you haven't experienced it before, when you pick up any sort of creative outlet, it could be an instrument, could be journaling, it could be writing, or journaling and writing are the same thing, could be drawing, whatever the case is, you will notice yourself, and most of us probably have experienced the flow state to some degree in our life, we just may not have known it, but you enter this different reality where time doesn't really exist, and you could say, one with the experience that you're going through or the activity that you're doing. It's like, for example, when I journal, sometimes I'll be dealing with something and I'll just be expressing myself on paper, and I'll write a few sentences, or I'll write like 3 pages, and I finish the 3rd page, and then I look 2 sentences back and I'm like, oh, that's the answer to the problem that I'm dealing with. And it's like, it just flowed out of me just from expressing myself. And from playing an instrument, you get to express yourself in a manner that you weren't able to before. And the coolest thing about like covers, for example, and also original music, being able to just, like, the way I come up with drum beats for the songs is I usually like to listen to the guitar riff before the lyrics, and then kind of come up with the drum pattern and some fills based on that. So that's just obviously pure creative expression. You're just coming up from, the jump of your mind. But also for the cover songs, I mean, some of these bands are just so good, so talented, so skilled, so great at their craft. And for somebody who's been playing for a few years, or for somebody that just picked up the instrument, to be able to play a song that professionals play is awesome. It's awesome because it's like, this guy, how you think to yourself, how did you listen to one of your favorite songs? And you're like, how did they even come up with this? And then as a musician, you get to be in that experience, arguably speaking, in my opinion, more than you can from just listening to it. And you can go so far with just listening and enjoying music, but I think playing an instrument gets you even further and deeper into the mix of what's going on within it, and you start to really understand it more and be so grateful for what they've been able to create, and how they even come up with this. There's so many songs that I listen to, and I think to myself, how the hell did somebody come up with something this amazing? It's just this. It's the finished product, and you get to listen to it. But at one time, it started from nothing. It came from, hey, I think this drum beat sounds cool, or hey, I came up with this guitar riff the other day, or hey, I came up with these 3 lines of lyrics, and we can make this into a verse, and then it created and came to be something absolutely amazing. So, all in all, I would say playing an instrument and any sort of creative outlet for yourself, if you're dealing with something like depression and anxiety, will most definitely help you. And even if you're not going through any of that, greatest experience in the world.
Well, I think one question which all of our audience has in their minds is, I think you kind of said it in a way, but what is one tip you would give to them, which isn't common, to reduce their anxiety and depression? I think you covered it a bit, but is there anything else you'd like to add, or a tip which isn't that common?
I would say the concept of reprogramming your mind. And this can be a pretty big topic because it can involve many different things. Like, you could reprogram your mind by changing the habit, or changing the internal thoughts that you say to yourself, the internal dialogue, changing the way you consciously express yourself. All of this reprograms your mind. And I think that it's the conscious experience of doing it that really gets it ingrained into your subconscious, because your conscious mind, the way I think about it, is it's the gateway to your subconscious. And so your subconscious is where all your programming is, society's norms and everything everyone's ever told you. Yeah, I can and can't do this in public. This is how I view myself. All that's like buried within you. And the conscious mind, if you're really aware of what you're doing and what you're thinking and how you're changing things and changing habits and evolving, then it really sinks more easily into the subconscious to change things or incite something new in there by really paying attention to what you're doing. So an exercise which kind of touched on before, being more mindful of everything, why you're doing the things that you're doing. And just when you're in the practice of doing the thing, really be aware of it, really appreciate it, really be in that moment and do it and enjoy it. And that can so much of the time sink that stuff into your subconscious more easily. And you might be asking yourself, well, if the conscious mind is the gateway to the subconscious mind, why do I have all these limiting and negative beliefs about myself and the world that like are in my subconscious and like broke that barrier? Most of our defense system, you could say, for our conscious mind is non-existent. Most of the time when somebody says something negative about us, we automatically accept it as true. Like, oh, you're such a bad person. Oh, maybe I am a bad person. And then you just kind of ask yourself those questions in the negative light, and your mind just sinks it in, right? But if somebody can say, you're a bad person, and you can genuinely think about it like, no, I'm not a bad person. I just made a mistake. Like, yeah, I can, hold myself accountable and apologize to the person because I made the mistake. But this doesn't mean I'm a bad person, right? And you consciously choose to think about it in this way. It starts to rewire yourself. And so a lot of us, our defense system for our conscious mind is pretty crappy. So when someone says something, it just bypasses it and it goes into the subconscious and it becomes a belief of ourselves, but in the world. But if we can put up some defense systems, which is consciousness for our conscious mind, then we can choose what we let in and what we keep out. Now, the danger with this is you could become so conscious or so aware of yourself that you become egotistical and say, oh, well, yeah, they said I did this wrong. No, I'm the best person in the world. There's no way I can ever do anything wrong. You don't take accountability. And obviously that's not good for yourself, your relationships, or the world. But if we can defend ourselves internally to a degree, we get to choose what thoughts, what habits, what beliefs we let into our mind, instead of just letting everything that happens in our external world affect that and then automatically believe it's true. Going back to what we were saying at the beginning, question your reality, question literally everything. And some people might think about this as paranoia. In my experience, it has not been. It's been one of the greatest gifts that, God, the universe, whatever you believe in, has been able to grant me. Being able to have any sort of experience in this external world and ask myself, okay, why is this happening? What is this trying to teach me? Okay, so how do I feel about it? Is it good or bad? All right, is it an experience that I want to have again? Probably not. Or, yeah, that was really great. And you reflect on your life, right? Instead of what we usually do is we go out, we have an experience, and we come home, we scroll on our phones, and then we go to bed, we do the cycle over again, right? So being more mindful of our life and everything we're doing can be a massive gateway to overcoming depression and anxiety and just make your life a better place.
I wanted to speak about the subject of podcasting because you mentioned at the start you're a podcaster, and I've watched your videos, I've listened to your videos, and I'm really inspired by the talks. I'll talk about it more at the end, but I read this like survey which I really, really want to mention once more. And they said in 2023, there is over 450 million podcasts, with the number growing. 64% of Americans, so that is an estimate of 183 million, like, Americans listening to podcasts at least once in their lives, where the UK podcast listenership is reaching an estimated 21.2 million listeners in 2022. And in 2024, this figure is expected to rise to 464 million podcast listeners worldwide. And that just shows you how crazy the market is right now and how people are jumping on, because at the start it was Joe Rogan. Now you see Sir Stephen Bartlett a bit more coming around. And what I wanted to ask is, I researched more into your channel, and I found out your first podcast was the 15th of August 2022 with Ruby Rhymes, I believe. And I just wanted to ask, what got you into podcasting? And Is that part of the process?
It's a great question. So most people don't know this. Before I started my own podcast, I actually had another one with a buddy of mine in high school. It was called Life with the Boys. And so the idea with that was, I think we were juniors in high school, and me and him, my best friend Jack, who we're still amazing friends to this day, for like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, we went back and forth. Oh, we should start a podcast, this and that, blah, blah, blah. We'd always talk about it, and years would roll by. We wouldn't start it. And then I suppose once junior year came around, we actually decided to start it. It only lasted 10 episodes, but we had a bunch of people on from our high school to talk about, psychology, what life's like as a teenager. We had some girls on to talk about relationships. And overall, it was a cool intro, at least like, especially for me, a cool intro to podcasting and listening to other people's experiences and being able to give my own insights and being on the internet for the first time. And I think obviously everybody in our high school was kind of like, oh, wow, like they started a podcast. Like, I wonder what they're talking about. So the first podcast, I might be wrong, but I think it got like over 500 views. So a bunch of people watched it. And, that was the first time where me and Jack and whoever we had on a guest for the first time, or I think the first time was just the two of us, we got to finally express ourselves and have other people see what we truly thought about life. Because obviously when you're in the high school corridors, you're not really doing anything that, is in any way related to real life. It's just kind of like, BS schoolwork of high school, right? But anyway, that was a pretty cool experience. And then towards the middle of our senior year of high school, it kind of took a drop off, and we got busy with other things, and wondering where we're going to go to college and university. And we ended up going to different places. I went to Florida and he went to Delaware. And so, we discontinued the podcast. And I had the idea in my mind of, just starting one myself. And I thought about it for a few months, and I didn't really put it into action. And then I'm pretty sure it was less than 5 days before I actually moved to the different state to go to university. I thought to myself, why not start something up? So my friend, Rudy Rhymes, as you mentioned, popped into my head. Rudy's actually in the band The Servers now, which is very cool. Everything kind of came full circle. But he's been an independent artist for a while. So anyway, I was friendly with him, and I was like, oh, let me ask this guy if he wants to be on a podcast. So he said yes, and it was a really cool intro podcast. We talked about what life was like, at our age, what the music industry is like, how people would act in high school, and all this general stuff. And then in the same day, I had someone else. I had a buddy of mine named Loren on, who made tons of money in crypto when it first became a thing. When Bitcoin first became a thing in like, I don't know what it was, like early, maybe 2012 or whatever the year was, he made a decent amount of money. So we hopped on, talked a little bit about finances, his experience, the world, the government, what's going on in the world, all this different stuff. And so from there, I was like, all right, these were really cool conversations. I learned a lot from these guys. I thought this was a lot of fun. And so when I got to Florida, the people I inevitably ended up meeting down there, met some really great minds and people who I'm friends with still to this day. And I did maybe 5 or 6 podcasts down there. I did one with a really great buddy of mine, Kevin, now that I'm friends with. I had a friend of mine who I met who is a Catholic missionary. I had a monk on, and I had like all these diverse guests and these people on, and it really opened up my mind to how people view the world and what happens after you die and all this crazy stuff. And I started to develop, a pretty good passion for it. And when I went down to Florida for college, I overall didn't have a great experience. Just my experience being there and doing school and stuff. So I actually delved into a little bit of a poor mental state during that time. So then once that happened, it was difficult for me to actually, I couldn't make videos about making your life better if my life wasn't doing great at the moment. So I took a little bit of a pause with that and kind of, fell off a little bit. And then I had the urge to take a semester off. So I did, came back home and went really a lot more full force on the podcast and started recording episodes all the time and really developing that. And that's, nowadays it's something that I love, being able to talk to everybody with different perspectives, different views on the world and life, and hearing all of that. And it really opens up your mind because, we can research all we want and et cetera, et cetera. But when we actually talk to the person who's done that thing that we're researching about, or they're really an expert in that field or that craft, it's very nice to hear and have a conversation with them and ask questions that you're genuinely curious about. You might research something and be like, oh, I'm not sure what the answer is to this. You have this guest on. Hey, how do you do this? Or what does this mean to you? And they give you an answer. You're like, oh, wow. I never thought about it that way before. I never knew that. Right. And so I think podcasting for the host itself and for anybody who's watching can be a super valuable and insightful experience. And a lot of people, especially nowadays as we're recording this, people are talking about how the podcast industry is getting, a lot really flooded, and, people are being hypocritical and having people on and talking about topics that they're not experienced in, and it's kind of misinformation. And there's all this talk about this stuff. But despite some of that maybe being true, I think podcasting is a great gateway to learning new information, because let's say you don't want to read this author's book that's 500 pages long. Reading is a great skill, not discrediting it at all. I still read, and, it's a very calming experience, and, I love it. But if you don't want to read the 500-page book, you can look up a podcast, most likely with the author, and he'll give you like the gold nuggets within that hour conversation that they're having. And it's like, okay, you still get tons of knowledge. So I think it can be a great gateway, especially if you maybe just don't have the time to read. You're really busy with work or whatever the case is. And, there's, a lot of podcasts that are coming up where, the danger is becoming, some of them are purely based on entertainment for the most part, rather than spreading knowledge and truth. And so that you see the rise of the we like to call them the red pill community online, where, they talk about women all the time and finances. And, absolutely, it's good to talk about women and finances and stuff on the internet. Cool, great. But it's become a little bit saturated in the sense of, people, a lot of these some of these big podcasts are just having OnlyFans models on and porn stars and this and that. And they're just like talking about all this BS, but people watch it because it's entertaining and it's funny. And, a girl says something really that you think is stupid, so you make fun of her, whatever the case is, right? So it's, in this sense, it's kind of like mushing your brain. But if we're talking about a podcast like yours or mine or Joe Rogan's or et cetera, those can be super positive and productive. But it's also very interesting because I think there was this statistic that I think it was like over 50% of women said like listening to Joe Rogan was a red flag or something, which was very, very funny to see. But I view that as, most people who criticize big creators maybe saw like one clip from them and took it out of context, or they haven't actually sat down and watched Joe Rogan for, this amount of time. Like, for example, there was the whole controversy with Joe Rogan about him being racist. I think he might have said the N-word one time when he was like describing something, and people tried to say he was racist. And then, anybody who actually listens to Joe Rogan knows that he's not, because you can watch his hundreds or, thousands of episodes that he has and realize that he's never said or expressed anything that, would be racist, right? So everybody's always trying to bring everyone down, and everyone's trying to paint the picture of, and, criticize people. And that's going to happen to the end of eternity. There's nothing we can do to stop that. But the counteraction to that is just keep spreading positivity, keep speaking your authentic truth, keep going. And the people that will support, the people that actually like your content, which will be a lot of people, let them support you. And the people that don't support you, let them not support you. That's okay. We all have different viewpoints, opinions on the world. Let people are going to think what they would like to think, even if they're not right.
Some insightful questions which me and you guys, the audience, have been wanting answers for.
You did mention about the saturated market in regards to podcasting. And I seen one question I really, really wanted to ask you. I was really dying to ask you as soon as you accepted the invitation, I was like, I really, really want to ask this question. And it was, I seen that photo of you and Chris Williamson. And for our viewers who don't know who true Chris Williamson is, or Chris Willex is his like other name, I think he's famous for his Modern Wisdom podcast. And he has lots of clips which surface of him saying a certain quote. And just he he speaks a lot of wisdom and deep conversations. And I wanted to ask you, how did that like come about? Like, what was the like interaction like, and what did you just take from it? Because this is the question I really, really wanted to ask. Because as soon as I seen that photo, I was like, I have to ask Brad. As soon as he comes on, I have to ask him because Chris Williamson is one of the best podcasters because he's diversifying because he's doing most screens right behind him now. So I wanted to ask your response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Chris has been one of my favorite podcasters for the past 3 years, and within the last year specifically, like he's absolutely blown up. He's over 1 million subscribers at this point, and it's absolutely amazing because he not only, obviously, since he's a really big platform now, gets to have on the super big guests, the Jordan Petersons, the David Goggins, but he also, even though he's big, still makes it a point to bring on those smaller guests that nobody knows exists, but they have so much value to share in their specific field and stuff. So that's a beautiful thing that he's still brings. And so I think he's a great example of a podcaster that is not only spreading knowledge and positivity, but is also the most authentic that he can be. I mean, he's so vulnerable about, something that he's dealing with or something that he's going through. And it's not often that you see a big creator be that vulnerable or that open about something. But anyway, meeting him was an absolutely incredible experience. So I think it was the day of, so he went on tour with James Smith. And if anyone doesn't know James Smith, he does a lot of fitness content and some comedy stuff, and he's really funny and very insightful too. And so they went on tour together, and so they were in New York City. And the day of, I did an in-person podcast with a guest at a studio, and I called my friend right after. I'm like, "You want to go to the city tonight? You want to go see them?" And he was. I had to convince him. He's like, "I don't really want to go to the city, blah blah blah." But I got him to say yes because I was like, I got to go see. I've been a fan of Chris's podcast for a long time. I love what he talks about. I got to go see what he has to say in person at this event and everything. And at the time, I didn't even know who James Smith was. I didn't know who he was until I got there. And then nowadays, after meeting him too and talking to them, now I watch James's content too. Great guys. Anyway, me, my best friend Jack, who I mentioned before, who I had the podcast with a while ago when I was in high school, and my brother, we went that night. My brother had to meet us later in the city because I think he was coaching or something before. But anyway, he met us there, and we watched Chris present, and then we watched James present. And they also had a Q&A at the end of their talks, and the people in the audience would have a chance to ask a question. And I fortunately I was one of the people that was picked to ask a question. And it was funny because like 2 days later, I looked at, or maybe I was just scrolling on Instagram, and I saw Chris and James sitting on the stage, and I clicked on the video and I heard my voice in it. And I'm like, oh shit, they made a clip of me asking my question. So that was like super awesome to see. But I think I asked what something that happened in their life that really taught them something. I don't remember the exact question, but anyway, it was really cool. And so anyway, at the end, they were like, "Oh, we're gonna go drink. We're gonna go hang out at this this bar across the street from the venue. If anyone wants to like come and hang out with us, you guys are more than welcome to." So we leave the venue and we go there, and me and my brother and my friend get there, and we're like, "Shit, it's 21 plus." We're not 21, and we don't go clubbing and stuff, so we don't got no fake IDs or anything, right? So we talk to the bouncer in the front. He's like, "Yeah, you got to be 21." And we're like, "Oh crap! Like how we're gonna miss this? We're not gonna be able to talk to them." But anyway, it ended up working out better because obviously, since none of us drink or anything, it wouldn't have been worth us to go in there and hang out because they would have been mobbed I'm sure once Chris and James walked in there, they probably were mobbed with a bunch of people talking to them. But anyway, we stood outside the venue and we saw Chris and James start walking on the sidewalk, towards us. And there were a few other people who were standing out there, so they got to talk to them as well. And then I waited till they were done, and I went up to Chris, and we introduced ourselves. I'm like, Brad, nice to meet you. And I told him that I had my own podcast, and we recently broke 1,000 subscribers. And he looked at me, and he had the biggest smile on his face. He shook my hand, and he gave me a hug, and he was like, "Fucking congrats, man." And in that moment, it was so great because this is a guy. Obviously, some big creators or celebrities, some of them are like assholes in person. Some of them just aren't like who they live up to be on the camera. Chris is the guy who lives up who you think he is on camera. He's super charismatic, super genuine, amazing guy, down to earth. And so, he looked at me and said, "Congrats, man," and smiled. And I could see that it was so genuine. It was such an amazing interaction. And I was like, "We just recently broke 1,000 subscribers." He's like, "Fucking congrats, man." He's like, "That to like 10,000 is like the best." He's like, "It goes downhill after that. Like, you're just sending emails all day and this and that." And we had a few laughs, and it was really cool. And so I'm not sure if we said anything else. Oh yeah, I said to him at the end, I was like, hopefully I'll have you on my show one day and we'll get to talk. And he was like, looking forward to it. So that was very cool. And then, we took pictures with him, my brother, my friend Jack, and I took pictures with Chris and James. And, we had a few more small talk, and then we went our separate ways. And I want to say one of the biggest takeaways from that experience was me, my brother, and my friend Jack were walking, and I'm pretty sure, I don't think it was me. I think my brother looked at me, and he was like, "You see how like they're just like us? Like they're Chris and James, as successful as they are, they're just like us. They just have more fame, more success, more money, more this and that, right? But they were just as down to earth and had the type of conversations that me and my brother and my friend have with each other all these times, the deep conversations and talking about life and spiritual concepts and self-development and relationships and all this stuff. And so we realized they are just us farther along on their journey. And that granted such an amazing feeling within us, because it shows you that you can be that too, right? The time frame on it that it might take isn't a year or 5 years. It's whatever it takes for you. But whatever you're doing in your craft, you can do it. You can get there. You just have to keep going. There's a lot of times this philosophy in society of as hard as you work, it might still not work out. And then you say like, "Oh, well, at least I tried." And in some cases of life, I think that might be true. But in a lot of cases of life, I think even if you make mistakes, if you quote unquote fail, you don't actually fail unless you just stop, unless you give up. I view it from my personal experience and my goals for my life and people that I talk to. I firmly believe that if you keep going, if you keep doing it, there's no way you can't make it. That whether it's going to take 2 years or 15 years, that's irrelevant to me. But if you keep with it, you'll be able to do it. And, this depends on what it is. Like, for example, the music industry, signing artists, and, there's so much conversation about, people selling their souls and all this stuff like that. I think something like the music industry, if you're like, "Hey, I want to be the biggest artist in the world," I would say, yeah, I'm not sure if you can do that. I wouldn't say stray away from it, but I would say that area is a little interesting, I would say. Like, for example, I'm a musician. I don't want to be, not saying I wouldn't want to be in a big band, but like, signing contracts with record labels, I'd be a little iffy on that. But anyway, whatever you want to do with your life, keep, as like motivational cliche as it sounds, you keep doing it. How could you not get it? Right? A lot of people are like, "Oh, it's like restaurants like fail all the time." Are you starting a restaurant? Probably not. Right? Yeah, there's tons of restaurants, but it's like you're starting an online business, you're starting coaching, you're starting this. It's like there's so much room for growth. There's so much room for there's endless opportunity in the business realm and entrepreneurship nowadays. And I think people are really starting to recognize that, and people are like, I don't want to work a normal job anymore. And I think this can bring really positive regards to certain people's lives. But obviously, not everyone's going to be an entrepreneur. Not everyone should be an entrepreneur. Not everyone's going to want to be, right? You do. My whole, as much as I sometimes talk like down on like university and school, if that's your calling, that's your calling. I'm a big proponent of following whatever you truly want to do. And what I found is like some people, or for a decent amount of people, going to school isn't what they actually want to do. They just do it because they feel like they have to. Like, so that's why I talk about school in a negative light sometimes. But I'm a big proponent of whatever you want to do with your life, go full force at it, make it happen, right? And so I think whatever that is for you, you can do that. And yeah, that takeaway, that experience with Chris and James was absolutely amazing. And the biggest takeaway was that they're just like us. They're just further along on their journey.
That's such a cool story. You told it so well. And you have to make sure to send me that clip of you asking me a question. I really want to listen to it.
Yeah, I'll send it right after we finish this.
Thanks, Brad. And I think the last thing I wanted to say was I noticed, I think it was 1 month ago, you hit your 50th podcast episode. So I want to give a massive congrats in regards to that. And I wanted to ask, where do you truthfully and like honestly think you are in the process? Because you've hit 50 now. Where do you think you are? Which position do you think you are in the process, in the book, in the journey? Where are you, truthfully?
I think I'm always doing my best to grow and improve. Especially in recording more and more podcasts and going back and editing my own podcast, I'll notice a lot of times where I might say a lot of filler words, or I might not express myself in the way I would have liked to. And so I try my best to keep that in mind. And okay, for this next podcast, I'm going to do my best to not say that, or not stutter in that area, or not use that filler word, and just take a second to think about it, whatever the case is. And so I'm always doing my best to grow. I know I'm not perfect, and I know I never will be, but obviously I'll keep getting better at this. I want to say obviously, since there's so many podcasts, sometimes it can be difficult to, maybe get the exact recognition that you would like. And so I want to say within like the last maybe 10 podcast episodes, views haven't been doing that great, but that doesn't deter me from doing it still, because I know the people that do watch it seem to be enjoying it, and I enjoy doing it, and the guests continue to get better and spread more value. And so I'm very excited. So I have, at the time of us recording this, dozens of podcasts that I have recorded, just not out yet. So I kind of, in the last like 15 episodes that I recorded, there's got to be at least probably around 30 or 40 more that I have recorded, just not released yet. Tons of the recent podcasts that I did and guests I've had on, they've been like just leveling up, like so many more in-depth specialty experts in the area type podcasts where I learned so much. And I'm like, once this is released, people will gain so much knowledge from it, because I know I did. Like, I've been on my journey of self-development, for example, for 5-6 years, and I've learned a lot of information. Obviously, there's always more information that I continue to learn every day. But talking to these people and having these conversations, the insights that I got were absolutely amazing. I'd finish the podcast and I'd sit back and I'd be like, wow, I can't believe I just had that conversation. That was so good. Right. And I learned so much. I didn't know I could learn so much from an hour of talking to someone, whatever the case is. Right. And so where I'm at with the process, podcasting for me is kind of like it's fun. Like, I get to learn new information. I get to share that knowledge with people. And so, I'm not, in my general mind right now, I'm not like, all right, I want my podcast to be my main source of income. I've been monetized on YouTube, but YouTube doesn't pay you much money, at least for the views I'm getting, for example. But I mainly do it because I enjoy it. I enjoy spreading the knowledge. I enjoy making the connections. I enjoy having the conversations, and so I think I'll keep doing it. And wherever the podcast takes itself, it takes itself. I'm going to keep promoting it. I'm going to keep doing it. And whether it blows up or not, in my mind right now, I'm going to keep doing it because it brings me fulfillment. And I hope it grants a lot of value to the people who watch the podcast as well.
Just one question. This is for just all the podcasters. What like, and I think I really want to listen to this response as well, because you've had so much diverse guests on. You've had someone who's like autistic, you've had actors on, you had doctors on, you had psychiatrists. It's so much diverse guests. So a struggle which we all have, especially for podcasters, is finding the next guest. What would you recommend, and how do you normally go about getting a certain guest on and the research as well?
So I would say a lot of the guests I have on is really just somebody I discover, whether it was from TikTok or YouTube, or I just stumbled upon their Instagram profile and I just really like their content and I think it's valuable, and I I just shoot them a message, and I say, hey, I love the content you're putting out. I run my own podcast. I was wondering if you'd be interested in being a guest sometime. And the amount of responses and people that say yes, you would never expect it. Like, you might think to yourself, like, oh, a lot of people are like going to reject you and say this and that. Obviously, it happens. There's people I reach out to that don't respond or they say no, but most of them say yes, at least in my experience so far. And so I think that for podcasters, don't be afraid to reach out to whoever you would like to reach out to. If they don't respond, they don't respond. If it's like a big creator, they maybe didn't even see it. So maybe a month down the line, reach out to them again, whatever the case is. And so for me, especially, so I started out with just people I knew in person. So that kind of, lined up. And then the first few guests that I did online were people I just found on TikTok. A creator named Existence, a creator named True Talks. I found them on TikTok. I just scrolled on TikTok when I used to, and I found their video and I clicked on their profile and I saw this. I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool. Like, Existence was really into spirituality, and he was like, I think he was like 15 at the time, and we had a great conversation. And then my friend, like, for example, so many of these guests that I meet or guests that I have on, like, we become friends after, which is like the greatest thing in the world. Like, my Truman, who was like, I think the second guest that I had on for an online podcast, like, we're great friends nowadays. And, he specialized at the time in talking about a lot of declassified CIA documents and explaining to people what they meant and what the government's doing, all this stuff. It was so cool to have those conversations. So a lot of times I just reach out to somebody's content that I like. And sometimes you get references. Like, I might have a guest on, and then they might say, hey, you would probably enjoy interviewing my friend or this person that I have interviewed, or no. And so then they send them over to me and they're like, oh yeah, we'd love to do it, or whatever the case is. And so there's friends of friends that you end up making connections with. And when you do a podcast with another podcaster, they might recommend some guests to you. And then just reaching out to new people. I would say biggest thing as a podcaster, do not be afraid to send messages to anyone and anybody. You never know who's going to say yes, and a lot of people say yes. So it's a very amazing experience.
Brad, I think just thank you so much for just coming on this podcast, because with me, I religiously watch your podcast. I started to watch the long form pieces of content lots now. And normally the latest I leave it is one day. And I just watch them religiously. I watch your shorts as well. I learn so much. I pick out certain parts, certain questions you ask, and I try to incorporate into my content. I look at your descriptions, I look at your tags, I look at the guests you have on, I look at your feedback as well. And I've seen how much joy you have from being a drummer, like in the service band as well. and I really wanted you on, and I'm really appreciative and grateful for just the conversation we had. We spoke so much different areas, and yeah, I'm really thankful for it, and I will continue supporting your podcast, and I believe you are on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.
Yes. Yeah. So
And
for yeah, I just want to
go
say
ahead.
I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, Brad is on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and he also has his own podcast, and I will put all the links right below. So check like his podcast out. It's much more deeper and it's more wiser than my podcast because mine's more positivity and motivation. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Brad, and I'll speak to you pretty soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
I hope you really enjoyed this episode. Comment below your favorite part. Was it more into depression and anxiety, or was it more in regards to Chris Williamson and future goals, which was my favorite part? I am really interested to see your responses. Episode 4 done, and one thing left to say, as always: shoot your shot.